January 1943, the sky is empty. It is just after dawn. A pale winter light settles over German airfields and industrial cities. Smoke still rises in thin columns from shattered factories and rail yards. Anti-aircraft guns stand silent, their barrels angled toward nothing. On runways and dispersal fields, Luftwaffe crews move slowly, exhausted, counting aircraft that did not return. Inside command buildings, German officers study reports with quiet certainty. The American bombers came. They struck deep. They stayed longer than expected. And now, after 8 hours in the air, they must be gone. Men remove gloves. Coffee cools untouched. Fighters are ordered down for refueling. Crews are released. The threat, it is assumed, has passed. There is logic behind the confidence. No bomber force can fly this far, fight through defenses, and still return for more. Engines cannot last. Crews cannot endure it. Fuel does not allow it. War has rules, and distance is one of them. Outside, the winter wind moves across the fields. The sound of engines does not return. The silence settles in, then, faintly at first, something interrupts the quiet. A vibration. A distant hum, and in that moment, German certainty begins to fracture, because the sky is about to prove that its limits were misunderstood. By early 1943, the air war over Europe had entered a dangerous transition. For more than 3 years, distance had protected Germany. The Reich's industrial heartland lay far beyond the reach of most enemy aircraft. British bombers struck at night, guided by moonlight and dead reckoning, trading accuracy for survival. Their losses were heavy. Their targets, often scattered. Yet the rhythm was predictable. Darkness. Alarm. Fire. Silence. The Americans arrived with a different belief. The United States Army Air Forces did not intend to hide in the dark. Their doctrine, developed in the interwar years, insisted that daylight precision bombing could cripple an enemy's war economy. Factories. Rail junctions. Ball-bearing plants. Oil refineries. The theory rested on two assumptions: that formations could defend themselves, and that technology could substitute for escort fighters that did not yet exist. At the center of this belief stood the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. 4 engines. Heavy defensive armament. A service ceiling above most German fighters. In formation, interlocking machine gun fire was supposed to create a moving wall of steel. American planners believed that discipline, altitude, and mass could replace the need for long-range protection. German officers studied these ideas carefully. The Luftwaffe was not unprepared. Its fighter arm had been built to defend Europe's skies, not to escort bombers across oceans. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s were fast, lethal, and well-armed, but they were short-legged. Fuel capacity limited their reach. Interception doctrine relied on timing, concentration, and rotation. Fighters would rise, strike, disengage, land, refuel, and rise again. This system assumed one crucial constant: the bomber stream would pass once. German intelligence calculated bomber endurance conservatively. Time over target mattered. Combat maneuvering consumed fuel. Damage increased consumption. 8 hours in the air pushed aircraft and crews to the edge of their tolerances. Anything longer was considered operationally unrealistic. Early American raids reinforced that belief. In 1942, U.S. bombers struck occupied France and the Low Countries. Targets were closer. Losses were manageable. German defenses adapted quickly. Fighter controllers learned American formations. Flak units refined their timing. The Americans, for all their confidence, were bleeding, yet the pattern remained familiar. One approach. One battle. One withdrawal. By late 1942, however, something was changing. American industrial output surged. Bomber groups arrived in England faster than German intelligence expected. Crews accumulated experience. Navigation improved. Formation discipline hardened. The Americans began pushing deeper, into western Germany, then beyond. Each step stretched German defensive planning thinner. Still, one assumption held firm inside Luftwaffe headquarters: no bomber force could strike far inside the Reich and remain operational long enough to do it twice. That belief would shape every decision that followed. Inside the Luftwaffe's command structure, confidence was not built on optimism. It was built on calculation. German air defense in 1943 functioned as a system of measured response. Radar stations along the coast detected incoming formations. Signals moved inland. Fighter wings were scrambled in carefully timed waves. Pilots climbed hard, attacked once or twice, then broke off before fuel or ammunition ran low. Ground crews worked fast. Engines were refueled. Guns were reloaded. The cycle repeated. This system was efficient, but only if the enemy behaved as expected. Fuel was the central constraint. German fighters had little margin for prolonged engagement. Extra minutes in combat meant fewer minutes to intercept later waves. For bomber crews, the problem was even more severe. American aircraft carried heavy bomb loads. Engines ran at near maximum output for hours. Damage from flak or fighters increased drag and consumption. Navigational errors compounded the risk. German intelligence officers tracked these limits closely. Captured documents, wreckage analysis, and pilot reports painted a consistent picture. American bombers were durable, but not inexhaustible. Crews showed signs of fatigue after long missions. Aircraft returned with empty tanks. Emergency landings increased as distance grew. The data suggested a hard ceiling on endurance. That ceiling became doctrine. German officers believed that once American bombers reached a certain depth inside the Reich, they had no choice but to turn back. The return leg, longer and more vulnerable, demanded conservation. A second strike would be reckless. A reappearance over defended targets was considered impossible. This belief shaped Luftwaffe behavior after major raids. Once the bomber stream passed, fighters were stood down. Pilots were debriefed. Losses were tallied. Maintenance crews addressed damage. Anti-aircraft batteries conserved ammunition. Cities counted their dead and began clearing rubble. It was not complacency. It was routine, but the routine rested on assumptions formed before the Americans fully tested their own limits. What German command did not fully account for was American operational persistence. Missions were not flown to the edge of safety, they were pushed past it. Crews accepted higher risk. Aircraft returned with fuel gauges hovering near zero. Engines failed on approach. Men bailed out over the channel or limped into neutral airspace. These were not anomalies. They were the cost of a doctrine determined to prove itself. By early 1943, American planners were willing to trade losses for psychological effect. They wanted to demonstrate reach, endurance, unpredictability. A message not written in words, but in repeated presence. German officers, reading the sky through the lens of their own limitations, did not yet see that message forming, and so, when the bombers disappeared after an 8-hour ordeal, German defenses relaxed. Confident that physics, fatigue, and fuel had done what fighters and flak had not, they believed the battle was over. What they did not realize was that the same formations they had already fought were still airborne, turning slowly, deliberately, back toward German airspace. 8 hours in the air strips wore down to endurance. Inside the B-17s, the cold is constant. At altitude, temperatures fall far below freezing. Oxygen masks press against faces already numb. Frost forms on metal surfaces. Words are exchanged through hand signals and brief nods. There is no energy left for conversation. Crews are running on discipline alone. Gunners track empty sky, knowing the danger has not passed. Navigators recheck calculations with shaking hands. Pilots fight fatigue, muscles locked in place, eyes burning from hours of concentration. Fuel gauges move steadily toward red. Every adjustment matters now. Many crews believe the mission is finished. Bombs are gone. The turn toward home feels earned. Relief settles in, but it is fragile. Training has taught them that the return is often deadlier than the approach. Then orders come through the intercom, the formation is not dispersing. Course is changing. Engines are pushed again. No1 cheers. No one questions it. They understand the risk immediately. Another hour in the air could mean the difference between landing and ditching. Another pass over Germany means facing defenses that will not expect them, but could still destroy them. Faces tighten behind masks. Gloves grip controls harder. The aircraft turns, heavy and slow, back toward enemy territory. Endurance becomes a weapon. German air defense lives on timing. Once the bomber stream passes, fighter units begin to cycle down. Aircraft land with empty tanks and damaged airframes. Pilots step out of cockpits exhausted, ears ringing, hands stiff from cold. Ground crews swarm the machines, working fast but methodically. Radar stations continue to scan, but nothing returns. The airspace remains quiet. Commanders interpret the silence as confirmation. The Americans have reached their limit. Fighter groups are stood down or repositioned. Fuel and ammunition are conserved for the next raid, expected tomorrow, or the day after. Anti-aircraft batteries reduce readiness levels. Fire control teams stand by rather than remain at full alert. This is not negligence. It is efficiency, but efficiency assumes predictability. When the radar screens remain clear longer than expected, the moment of vulnerability expands. The defensive web loosens. The tight coordination that defines German air defense begins to relax. The system was never designed for an enemy willing to break its own endurance models. At higher levels of command, decisions are shaped by precedent. German officers reviewing reports see familiar patterns: bomber losses, fuel estimates, timing charts. Everything aligns with expectation. The Americans have pushed far, perhaps too far. Their withdrawal confirms the limits German planners believed in. Orders reflect that belief. There is no call for full re-scramble. No emergency redeployment. The day's crisis is logged as severe but concluded. In war, certainty is seductive. It simplifies chaos. It turns noise into data, but certainty can also blind. German leadership does not imagine a second strike because it contradicts years of accumulated experience. No air force has ever attempted such persistence. To expect it would be to rewrite the rules under fire, and so, the decision stands: the sky is judged empty. The B-17 was never designed for comfort. It was designed to stay in the air. Its 4 engines gave redundancy, not efficiency. One could fail. Sometimes 2. As long as the aircraft held altitude, the mission continued. Fuel tanks were spread through the wings. Consumption varied by throttle, altitude, damage, and weather. Crews learned to nurse engines hour by hour. Navigation was equally unforgiving. Celestial fixes, dead reckoning, drift meters, each demanded concentration after exhaustion had already set in. Small errors early in the flight could grow dangerous on the return. Yet American crews grew accustomed to operating at these margins. They learned how long engines could run before oil pressure dropped. How far a formation could stretch fuel by throttling back just enough. German analysts knew the specifications. What they did not fully grasp was how often those specifications were exceeded. American technology was not superior because it was stronger. It was superior because it was tolerated beyond design limits. Aircraft returned with cracked manifolds, leaking tanks, and engines that seized only after landing. These machines survived because crews demanded it of them. The second approach toward Germany was not powered by excess capability. It was powered by acceptance of risk. For German fighter pilots, the day feels finished. Aircraft are parked. Some pilots are already filing reports. Others sit on crates, smoking, replaying engagements in low voices. Losses are counted. Victories are claimed. The tension that comes with interception slowly drains away. The idea that the bombers might return does not enter conversation. Radar warnings earlier in the day demanded total focus. Now the screens are quiet. Controllers relax their posture. The sky offers no urgency, then a report arrives that does not fit. A faint contact. Uncertain. Possibly stragglers. It is dismissed at first. Damaged bombers sometimes lag behind. They are hunted down easily, if at all. No one expects a formation. No one expects intent. When additional contacts appear, confusion spreads. Scramble orders follow, but they come late. Pilots run back to aircraft that are not ready. Engines are cold. Fuel loads incomplete. Ammunition not fully replenished. The system that worked so well hours earlier now struggles to reassemble itself. The Luftwaffe was prepared to fight once. It was not prepared to fight again. War is shaped by what each side believes is possible. German officers believed endurance had limits. American planners believed limits could be stretched. The clash between those beliefs created a gap more dangerous than flak or fighters. Silence became deceptive. The empty sky signaled safety to one side and opportunity to the other. The absence of engines was interpreted not as uncertainty, but as conclusion. When the sound returned, it carried more than aircraft. It carried the collapse of assumption. The shock was not just tactical. It was cognitive. The realization that the enemy had chosen to return, knowing the risk, forced German command to confront a new kind of adversary. One that did not operate within expected margins. From that moment, every future silence would be suspect, and as the distant hum grew louder, it became clear that this was no mistake, no straggler, no accident of navigation. The Americans were coming back on purpose. The first reports arrive fragmented. Radar operators along the German interior register faint echoes where none are expected. The altitude readings are high. The speed is steady. Controllers hesitate, checking equipment, recalibrating displays. The logic resists the data. These contacts should not be here. Minutes pass. The echoes grow clearer. Multiple returns. A pattern forms, tight, disciplined, unmistakably deliberate. Inside command centers, disbelief turns to urgency. Telephones ring. Orders are revised mid-sentence. Fighter units that had been stood down are suddenly recalled. Scramble alarms sound across airfields that had already exhaled, but time has been lost. On the ground, German fighters sit unready. Fuel trucks are still moving. Ammunition belts are half-fed. Engines that should have been warm are cold. Pilots run for cockpits, pulling on helmets as they go. Above them, the American bombers approach in formation. They are fewer now. Gaps mark where aircraft fell or turned back. Yet the formation holds. Engines drone unevenly. Some aircraft trail smoke. Others fly with visible damage. They are wounded, but intact enough. The bombers do not maneuver. They do not probe. They continue straight in. German anti-aircraft batteries begin to fire, late and uneven. Shells burst below the formation, then climb higher as gunners correct. Fire control solutions lag behind reality. Fighters claw into the air just as the first bombs begin to fall. This second strike is not as heavy as the first. It does not need to be. It lands on targets already disrupted. Factories damaged earlier are hit again. Repair crews are scattered. Infrastructure that survived the morning does not survive the afternoon. Inside German command rooms, the meaning becomes clear. This is not desperation. It is demonstration. By the time German fighters reach altitude, the situation has already shifted beyond recovery. Interception is fragmented. Some pilots engage isolated elements of the formation. Others never find the bombers at all. Coordination breaks down as controllers struggle to rebuild a picture that should not exist. The Americans press on. Bombs fall with reduced opposition. Flak remains dangerous, but its density is uneven. Fire is scattered where earlier it had been concentrated. The second wave exploits the gap created by disbelief. On the ground, damage multiplies. Rail yards struck in the morning are hit again before repairs begin. Power lines are severed a second time. Workshops lose machinery that survived the first pass. Fires merge, smoke thickens, visibility collapses, German officers watch maps being updated in real time. Red markers overlap earlier damage. Reports contradict earlier conclusions. The word unexpected appears again and again. For the Luftwaffe, the shock is immediate and personal. Pilots report engines cutting out from fuel starvation during pursuit. Ammunition runs dry faster than planned. Aircraft forced into emergency landings collide on crowded fields. Losses mount not only from combat, but from confusion. The Americans, meanwhile, are nearing the edge of survival. Fuel gauges hover near empty. Some bombers peel away early, seeking the shortest route out. Others hold formation until the last possible moment, knowing that cohesion still offers protection. When the formation finally turns west for the second time, it does so under strain that borders on collapse. Aircraft are lost on the return. Engines fail over hostile territory. Crews bail out. Others ditch in the channel. Many land with tanks effectively dry, but the damage is done. Inside German headquarters, the realization settles heavily. The Americans have proven that endurance can be weaponized. That a raid is not defined by a single approach. That the sky cannot be trusted to empty itself when logic says it should. From this moment forward, German air defense will operate under a new assumption: the enemy may return, always. In the hours that follow, Germany begins to measure the damage. Initial reports underestimate the impact. It is difficult to separate destruction caused by the first strike from losses inflicted by the second. Fires blur timelines. Collapsed structures erase evidence of what survived the morning. As clarity improves, the scale becomes undeniable. Facilities hit twice show disproportionate damage. Temporary repairs made between raids are rendered meaningless. Rail traffic is halted longer than anticipated. Electrical grids take days, not hours, to stabilize. Production schedules collapse under uncertainty. The Luftwaffe tallies its losses with discomfort. Aircraft destroyed in the air are only part of the total. Others are written off after emergency landings. Maintenance crews work through the night, but shortages of parts and trained personnel slow recovery. Pilot fatigue becomes a documented factor, not an abstract concern. American losses are heavy as well. Bombers fail to return. Crews are listed as missing. Aircraft ditch at sea or divert to neutral territory. Yet for American planners, the mission is judged a success, not because of numbers alone, but because of effect. German internal assessments reflect this shift. Reports emphasize the failure of expectation. Defensive readiness had been relaxed at the worst possible moment. Commanders note that the second strike achieved results out of proportion to its size. The conclusion is unsettling: the air war can no longer be paced by previous models. The enemy is not bound by the same operational assumptions. Distance, once a buffer, is now a challenge being actively contested. By nightfall, orders begin to circulate, readiness levels are raised. Fighter units are instructed to maintain higher alert even after engagements conclude. Fuel reserves are reassessed. Anti-aircraft batteries are warned against early stand-down. These measures are costly. Maintaining constant readiness strains men and machines. It accelerates wear. It increases accidents. But the alternative, being surprised again, is no longer acceptable. The battle has ended, but its influence has only begun. In the days that follow, German air defense doctrine begins to harden. The immediate reaction is procedural. Radar coverage is extended deeper inland. Stand-down protocols are rewritten. Fighter units are ordered to maintain readiness longer, even after bomber streams disappear from screens. The sky is no longer trusted to signal closure, but deeper changes take shape beneath the paperwork. German commanders now recognize that American air power is not merely growing, it is adapting. The second strike forces a reassessment of bomber psychology. These are not crews seeking the safest return. They are crews trained to accept extreme risk as routine. This realization carries consequences. To meet it, the Luftwaffe must commit more resources per raid. Fighters remain airborne longer. Fuel consumption increases. Pilot fatigue accumulates. Accidents rise. Each American mission now extracts a heavier toll from German readiness, even when bombs do limited damage. The pressure compounds over time. Cities no longer relax after the first all-clear. Factories hesitate to begin repairs too quickly. Rail schedules are disrupted by uncertainty. The rhythm of civilian life fractures further under the strain of unpredictability. Within German intelligence, language changes. Reports no longer speak of bomber limits. They speak of bomber intent. Analysts note that American planners are testing boundaries deliberately. Learning where defenses weaken, where endurance assumptions fail, where hesitation creates opportunity. This is not an isolated incident. It is a signal of how the air war will be fought from now on. For the Americans, the lesson is equally clear: persistence works, even at high cost. Repeated presence deep inside enemy territory forces errors. It breaks routines. It drains resources disproportionately. The return after 8 hours becomes a reference point. Proof that psychological dominance can be built through endurance as much as destruction. The sky over Germany has changed its meaning. Silence no longer reassures. It warns. The moment American bombers returned after 8 hours in the air did not decide the war. But it changed how the war would be fought. Until then, distance had been treated as a rule. A boundary written into fuel charts, pilot endurance, and engineering limits. German officers did not misunderstand American aircraft, they misunderstood American intent. They assumed the enemy would stop where logic suggested he should. That assumption collapsed in the quiet between two waves of engines. What the Americans demonstrated was not invulnerability, but willingness. Willingness to accept loss. Willingness to fly machines past their margins. Willingness to demand more from men already at the edge of exhaustion. In industrial war, that willingness became a force of its own. For Germany, the lesson was costly and permanent. Air defense could no longer rest. Fighters could no longer assume a single battle per day. Every silence became a threat, every empty sky a question mark. Resources drained faster, mistakes multiplied, and certainty, once a stabilizing force, became dangerous. For history, the episode marked a shift in modern warfare. Endurance replaced surprise. Persistence replaced rhythm. The sky became a place not just of attack, but of psychological pressure sustained over time. Long after the fires were extinguished and the wreckage cleared, the meaning of that return remained. It was the sound of engines proving that limits are not always fixed. And that in war, the most powerful weapon may be the refusal to accept where an enemy believes you must stop.